Antonio was a 75-year-old gentleman with white hair and a kind expression. He had a calm and tranquil demeanor, always with a smile on his face. His life was dedicated to caring for his daughter, Maria, who was 45 years old and had faced severe physical disabilities since birth. Antonio had been a widower for 20 years, after his beloved wife passed away due to health complications. After losing his companion, he devoted himself even more to caring for Maria, who was now completely dependent on him. "My girl, my reason for living," he would often say, tenderly caressing Maria's hair. Antonio prepared all her meals, bathed her, did her physical therapy, and accompanied her to every medical appointment. His routine revolved around his daughter's well-being. In the rare moments when he wasn't caring for Maria, Antonio enjoyed going to the nearby plaza and chatting with his friends. He would tell stories about his daughter, always with a special gleam in his eye, proud of his beloved child. "She is everything to me, you understand. My life is about caring for her, and I wouldn't trade it for anything," he would tell his friends, who admired the old gentleman's dedication. Antonio was an exemplary father, who had given up many of his own dreams and personal pleasures to devote himself entirely to Maria. His love was unconditional, and he would do anything to ensure his daughter's well-being. Maria was a 45-year-old woman, Antonio's only child. Since birth, she had faced severe physical disabilities that greatly limited her mobility and independence. Despite this, Maria was a sweet, kind, and patient person. Antonio remembered as if it were yesterday when the doctors told him that his daughter was born with serious health problems. "Your baby has cerebral palsy, sir. Unfortunately, she will have many difficulties throughout her life," the professionals had said at the time. That news devastated Antonio and his wife. They were crushed, but they refused to give up on little Maria. "We will care for her with all our love. We will give our best so that she can have a full life," Antonio told his wife, determined. And so it was. Since she was a baby, Maria needed intensive care. Antonio and his wife took her to various therapies, did daily exercises, and adapted their home to facilitate her mobility. This special child became the center of attention and love in that family. Unfortunately, when Maria turned 25, her mother passed away, leaving Antonio alone in caring for his daughter. He then dedicated himself even more, becoming virtually a slave to Maria's well-being. "Daddy, you don't have to do all this. I can manage on my own," Maria would say, but Antonio would respond with a smile, "My daughter, you are everything to me. I do this with the greatest pleasure in the world." And so, Antonio and Maria lived in a relationship of deep love and mutual dependence, with the father devotedly caring for his special daughter. The relationship between Antonio and Maria was something touching to witness. They formed an inseparable pair, bound by a paternal filial love that went far beyond what one would expect from a father and daughter. Since Maria's mother passed away, Antonio had become the absolute reference in her life. He took care of every detail, ensuring her well-being with an impressive dedication. "Daddy, you don't have to try so hard. I can do some things on my own, you know," Maria would say affectionately, but Antonio always responded with determination. "My daughter, you are everything to me. I don't mind doing all this, it's a pleasure to take care of you." And it was true. Antonio seemed radiant when he was providing any assistance to Maria, whether helping her get dressed, eat, or move around the house. He treated her with unparalleled delicacy, as if she were the most precious creature in the world. "You are my treasure, my most valuable asset. he would say, tenderly caressing his daughter's hair. Maria, in turn, reciprocated this love with all her soul. She loved spending hours talking to her father, laughing at his jokes, and listening to the stories he told about their childhood. When they were together, it seemed like nothing else in the world mattered. They formed a private universe, where only the deep bond that united them existed. "I love you so much, Daddy. I don't know what I would do without you," Maria would say, with tears in her eyes. And Antonio, with a silly smile on his face, would respond, "And I love you more than anything, my daughter. You are the reason for my living." That relationship inspired everyone around them. It was possible to feel how the father and daughter supported each other, nurturing one another with unconditional love. The routine of Antonio and Maria was a true spectacle of love and dedication. Since Maria's mother passed away, Antonio had completely taken over the care of his daughter, becoming her guide, nurse, and full-time companion. The morning would start early for the two. Precisely at 7 a.m., Antonio would enter Maria's room with a serene smile on his face. "Good morning, my princess. Did you sleep well?" he would ask, giving her a kiss on the forehead. Carefully, Antonio would help her get up from the bed and take her to the bathroom. He would fill the bathtub with warm water and, delicately, bathe Maria, talking to her about the plans for the day. "Today we'll take a little walk in the plaza, okay? And then, if you want, we can watch that movie you like so much." Maria would smile, satisfied with her father's dedicated attention. "Oh, Daddy, you're the best. I don't know what I would do without you." After the bath, Antonio dried her with soft towels and dressed her in clean and comfortable clothes. Then they headed to the kitchen, where he prepared a delicious breakfast, with Maria's favorite dishes. "There you go, my love. Your breakfast is served," he announced, placing the plate in front of Maria with great care. During meals, they chatted animatedly, laughing and exchanging affections. Antonio would cut the food into smaller pieces, helping Maria eat with ease. After breakfast, it was time for physical therapy and light exercises, always accompanied by Antonio, who monitored each of his daughter's movements with extra attention. And so the day went on, with Antonio dedicating himself entirely to Maria's care, with patience, affection, and a devotion that touched everyone who knew them. Antonio's dedication to his daughter Maria was so notorious that it ended up catching the attention of all around them. His friends, neighbors, and family members couldn't help but comment on how exemplary a father he was. "You see how Antonio takes care of Maria? He's an angel on earth," said neighbor Mrs. Eulalia, who had lived next door for many years. "That man gave up everything to devote himself entirely to his daughter. It's rare to see a father so devoted," added Mr. Manol, another of Antonio's longtime friends. Even more distant relatives, when they came to visit the family, were impressed by the routine of care that Antonio maintained. "I wonder how he manages to handle everything alone. It must be an enormous sacrifice," commented Antonio's niece, Marissa, after a visit. And Antonio, whenever he heard these praises, would smile shyly and say, "Oh, you're exaggerating. I do this because I love my daughter more than anything. She is my life." His dedication, however, went far beyond what others could imagine. Antonio sacrificed his own interests and pleasures to devote himself entirely to Maria's care. He spared no effort to ensure his daughter's well-being and happiness. "Look at how they are together, it's heartbreaking. "Antonio is a wonderful father," commented Antonio's cousin, moved, upon seeing the old gentleman tenderly caring for Maria. All who knew that pair deeply admired the love and care that Antonio bestowed on his daughter. He was, unquestionably, a model father, who placed love above all else. Antonio was a man of very regular habits. His life revolved around the dedicated care of his daughter Maria, and he had control over every detail of their routine. So, when something began to seem a little out of the ordinary, he couldn't help but notice. It all started a few weeks ago, when Antonio noticed that Maria was a little quieter than usual during their daily conversations. She seemed more distant, sometimes even discouraged, which was very rare. "My daughter, is everything all right? You seem a bit sad today," Antonio asked, tenderly caressing Maria's face. "Oh, Daddy, it's nothing. I'm just a little tired, that's all," she responded, avoiding his gaze. Antonio was not satisfied with this response, but he did not want to press her. He had complete trust in Maria and believed that if something was bothering her, she would eventually tell him. But as the days went by, Antonio noticed other small changes in his daughter's routine. She seemed a little more reluctant to do some of her daily activities, like physical therapy, and even avoided certain foods she had once loved. "Daughter, don't you want to try this new dish I made? You always enjoyed it so much," Antonio would say, concerned. No, Daddy, not today. I'm not very hungry," Maria would respond, changing the subject. This all began to arouse a slight suspicion in Antonio. Was there something happening that he didn't know about? Something that was slipping out of his control? He found himself observing Maria's reactions attentively, trying to understand what could be changing in that well-established routine. After all, his daughter's happiness and well-being were his top priority. After a few days of closely observing the subtle changes in Maria's behavior, Antonio came to the conclusion that something was not right. His daughter, as cheerful and communicative as she had always been, seemed to be hiding something from him. Is she sick again? Or worse, is someone bothering her in some way? He would ask himself, worried. Antonio couldn't sleep well at night, his mind restless with all the possible explanations for that transformation in Maria's routine. He needed to find out what was going on, even though the idea of spying on his own daughter made him extremely uncomfortable. But I have no choice. I need to find out what's happening to my girl, he concluded, determined. One morning, Antonio got up earlier than usual and quietly left the house. He went to a specialty store for security equipment and bought a small hidden camera, the kind that could be unobtrusively installed in some corner of the house. When he returned, he carefully observed every detail of the environment, looking for the best location to position the device. After much thought, Antonio decided that the corner of the living room bookshelf would be the perfect hiding spot. No one will notice it here. Now I'll be able to see everything that happens when I'm not around, he thought, installing the camera with trembling hands. Antonio knew that this action could betray Maria's trust, but he saw no other alternative. His only priority was to find out what was leaving his daughter so dejected and ensure her well-being, even if he had to resort to unconventional methods. Forgive me, my daughter. I just want to take care of you. I need to know what's going on, Antonio whispered, looking intently at the hidden camera. And so, with a heavy heart, he anxiously awaited the moment when he could finally unravel the mystery surrounding his beloved Maria. After installing the hidden camera in his home, Antonio spent the following days extremely anxious and worried. His heart raced every moment, as he knew he would soon discover what was truly happening with his beloved daughter, Maria. Dear God, what if it's something really serious? What if someone is hurting her? He wondered, feeling a lump in his throat just at the thought. Antonio kept staring intently at the small device, eagerly waiting for the moment when he could finally turn on the computer and watch the footage. He knew he would have to be very patient and analyze every detail with extra care. I need to find out what's happening. I can't let my daughter suffer alone, he repeated to himself, trying to convince himself that this action was necessary. On the day he would finally watch the recordings, Antonio gathered all his self-control. He grabbed a notebook and a pen, prepared to take down any relevant information that could help him understand the situation. Okay, Antonio, you can do this. Think of Maria's well-being, he encouraged himself as he turned on the computer and accessed the footage from the hidden camera. With trembling hands, he began watching the videos, attentive to every movement, every reaction from Maria. With each passing minute, his heart raced faster, and he felt a tightness in his chest, fearing he might discover something terrible. My daughter, what's happening to you? He whispered as he observed the images with total concentration. Antonio knew this moment would be decisive. Finally, he would have a chance to understand what was disrupting the routine of his beloved Maria. And he was willing to do anything to uncover the truth and protect her. Antonio took a deep breath and began watching the footage from the hidden camera, his eyes focused on every tiny detail. As the minutes went by, he became increasingly intrigued and concerned about what he was seeing. In the early moments, the routine of Antonio and Maria seemed the same as always. Her father helped her get up, take a bath, and eat, all with the delicacy and affection that Antonio had always shown. That's right, my daughter. Come on, finish your breakfast, Antonio would say, his voice soft and full of affection, as he helped Maria eat. But then, something unexpected began to happen. During one of the physical therapy sessions, Maria seemed to be putting in less and less effort, until at one point she simply refused to continue. Oh, Daddy, I don't want to do this anymore today. I'm so tired, she said, with a disgruntled expression on her face. Antonio, however, insisted gently, my daughter, you need to do your exercises. Come on, just a little bit more. But Maria shook her head, stubborn. No, Daddy, I don't want to. That's enough for today. Antonio was visibly annoyed, but he did not force the situation. He simply helped her up and took her back to the bedroom, with a worried look. At that moment, Antonio frowned, intrigued. Maria's reaction made no sense at all. She had always cooperated so well during the therapies. What's happening to you, my daughter? He murmured, observing the images with growing unease. And as the day progressed, Antonio witnessed a few more scenes that deeply troubled him. Maria seemed constantly angry, refusing to eat or participate in activities that had once delighted her. This was so unusual and discrepant from his daughter's usual behavior that Antonio began to seriously question whether something very wrong was happening. After carefully watching the footage from the hidden camera, Antonio was deeply disturbed and confused. This was not the same behavior he was used to seeing in his daughter Maria, and it left him extremely distressed. He paused the video, ran his hands through his gray hair, and shook his head, trying to process everything he had seen. My God, what's happening to my daughter? This makes no sense. Antonio exclaimed, his voice choked with concern. In the images, Maria seemed to be constantly irritated and reluctant to perform the routine activities that she had once enjoyed so much. She refused to do physical therapy, avoided eating properly, and even reacted harshly to her father's displays of affection. "Daughter, why are you acting this way? What's bothering you?" Antonio whispered, as if he could get an answer from the video. He mentally reviewed all the details he had noticed in the past few days, trying to find a logical explanation for this sudden change in Maria's behavior. But nothing seemed to make sense. Is she sick again? Or is someone threatening her in some way? Antonio wondered, his heart racing with anguish. The image of his daughter, always so sweet and obedient, now seemed distant and inaccessible. This left Antonio deeply shaken, as he knew there was something there that he did not understand. "My girl, what's happening to you?" he repeated, feeling the tears streaming down his weathered face. Antonio couldn't understand what could have triggered this transformation in Maria's routine and mood. And this lack of answers was consuming him from the inside. He knew he needed to investigate further, to discover what was really happening. After all, the happiness and well-being of his daughter were his greatest purpose in life. After watching the first footage from the hidden camera and being deeply disturbed by his daughter Maria's unexpected behavior, Antonio decided he needed to investigate further what was going on. "I need to understand what is causing this abrupt change in my most precious treasure," he thought, with a determined expression on his face. Antonio returned to the computer and, with trembling hands, began analyzing the recordings of the following days. He didn't want to miss any detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. As the images unfolded, Antonio felt his heart tighten more and more. Maria seemed to be avoiding even physical contact with him, refusing his affectionate hugs. "Daughter, what's happening? Why are you distancing yourself from me?" Antonio whispered, observing the scenes with deep sadness. At times, Maria would even become enraged at Antonio's attempts to help her with daily activities. She would yell and cry, apparently without any obvious reason. "No, Daddy, leave me alone. I don't want your help," she would shout, frightening Antonio. This was all so unusual and alarming that Antonio became increasingly lost, unable to understand what could be causing this dramatic change in his daughter's behavior. He spent hours watching the recordings, taking notes on every detail, every reaction from Maria. Antonio alternated between concern and anger, as he couldn't understand what could be disturbing their routine so much. "My God, what's happening here? I need to find out what's causing all this," Antonio said, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. Increasingly convinced that something very wrong was happening, he strived to remain calm and continue watching the recordings, hoping to finally uncover the truth. Antonio spent hours carefully analyzing the footage from the hidden cameras, trying to understand what was causing this dramatic change in his daughter Maria's behavior. And to his shock and horror, he ended up discovering something absolutely unexpected. In one of the recordings, Antonio saw as an unknown man stealthily entered through the back door and approached Maria, who was alone in the living room. To his surprise, Maria did not seem frightened by the arrival of this intruder. In fact, she even seemed relieved to see him. "Finally, you're here," Maria said, in a tone of reproach. "I thought you weren't coming today." The man then grabbed her brutally, pulling her by the hair. "Oh, you ungrateful thing. Do you really think I would leave you alone with this old fool?" he shouted. Antonio felt his heart racing as he witnessed this violent scene. He couldn't understand what was happening. This man was mistreating his daughter, and she seemed to accept it with resignation. "No, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to defy you," Maria pleaded, with tears in her eyes. The man violently threw her onto the couch, causing her to let out a groan of pain. "Shut up and listen to me, you useless thing. As long as that idiotic old man is around, you'll stay quiet and obey everything I say. Understand?" Maria just nodded, her head lowered. Antonio watched the scene, completely horrified. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. "My daughter. What is this monster doing to you?" he murmured, feeling the tears streaming down his face. Gradually, Antonio realized that this man was Maria's secret partner, someone who mistreated her and took advantage of her dependent condition to hold her hostage. And the worst part was that Maria seemed too frightened to reveal the truth. This discovery shook Antonio to the core of his soul. He needed to act immediately to protect his daughter from the clutches of that abusive man. After witnessing the shocking scene of Maria being mistreated by an unknown man through the hidden camera footage, Antonio felt completely shaken. He couldn't believe what his eyes had seen. With his heart racing, Antonio decided to confront Maria directly about it. He needed to understand what was happening, even if it meant breaking the trust they had between them. "My daughter, we need to talk," Antonio said, his voice choked with emotion, when Maria returned from the bedroom. "What is it, Dad? Is everything okay?" Maria asked, surprised by Antonio's serious expression. Antonio hesitated for a moment, unsure how to approach the subject. Finally, he gathered the courage and said, I installed a security camera in our house. And I saw everything that's happening. You have a man who mistreats you, don't you?" Maria's eyes widened, the color draining from her face. She began to deny it frantically. No. What are you saying, Dad? There's no one mistreating me here." Antonio looked at her sadly. "It's no use denying it, my daughter. I saw everything with my own eyes. That man assaulted you and threatened you." Maria started crying, knowing she could no longer hide the truth. "Oh, Daddy. I didn't want you to find out this way," she whispered, her voice trembling. "So it's true?" Antonio asked, feeling a tightness in his chest. "Are you being hurt by this man?" Defeated, Maria nodded, lowering her head. "Yes, Daddy. He threatens me and forces me to do things I don't want to. I'm afraid of him." Antonio approached Maria, hugging her tightly. She cried profusely in his arms, finally admitting the truth she had tried so hard to hide. "My daughter, why didn't you tell me? I could have helped you," Antonio said, his voice faltering. "I was so afraid of losing you, Daddy. He said he would do something terrible if I told you," Maria responded, between sobs. Antonio felt his heart break upon hearing that. He knew he needed to act quickly to protect his beloved daughter from the clutches of that monster. After Antonio confronted her about what he had seen in the hidden camera recordings, Maria finally admitted the truth about the man who was mistreating her. She felt ashamed and terrified, but she knew she could no longer hide it from her father. With tears streaming down her face, Maria knelt before Antonio, begging for his forgiveness. "Daddy, forgive me. I didn't want you to find out this way," she said, holding her father's hands firmly. Antonio looked at her with deep sadness, his heart broken to see his beloved daughter in this situation. "My daughter, why didn't you tell me before? I could have helped you," he responded, his voice faltering. Maria averted her gaze, feeling absolutely ashamed. "I was so afraid, Daddy. This man threatened me, said he would do terrible things to me if I told you anything." She squeezed Antonio's hands even tighter, pleading, "Please, forgive me. I didn't want to disappoint you or lose you. You're everything to me." Antonio pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the tears streaming down his aged face. "My girl, my most precious treasure. You could never, ever disappoint me. I just want to protect you." Maria cried profusely, leaning against her father's chest. "I know, Daddy. I know. I'm sorry for lying, for hiding all this from you. I was so afraid of losing you too." Antonio tenderly caressed Maria's hair, his heart breaking at seeing his daughter so frightened and fragile. "Sure, it's okay, my love. You're safe now. I will never abandon you, never," he whispered, placing a kiss on her forehead. Maria clung to Antonio even tighter, feeling protected and loved like never before. She knew that, despite everything, she could count on her father's unconditional love. After Maria finally admitted the truth and begged for forgiveness, Antonio enveloped her in a tight embrace, feeling his heart breaking at seeing his beloved daughter so fragile and scared. "My girl, my most precious treasure," he murmured, delicately stroking Maria's hair. "I could never blame you for this. You are my life, and I just want to protect you." Maria cried profusely, clinging to Antonio as if her life depended on it. "Oh, Daddy, forgive me. I was so afraid of losing you, of disappointing you." Antonio looked at her tenderly, gently wiping away her tears. "My daughter, you could never, ever disappoint me. I love you more than anything in this world." He pulled her closer, his heart broken at imagining the fear and anguish Maria had faced alone. "That monster will pay for everything he's done to you. I'll take him down, you can be sure of that," Antonio said, determination shining in his eyes. Maria looked at him, her eyes wide. "No, Daddy. You can't. He threatened me, said he would do something terrible if I told you." Antonio firmly grasped Maria's shoulders. "Listen to me, my love. No one will hurt you again as long as I'm here. I will protect you, no matter the cost." He hugged her tightly, feeling the fragility of his daughter. Antonio was devastated that he had not noticed what was happening sooner, but now he had a single priority: to save Maria from that hell. "I'll take care of you, my dear. You're safe now," Antonio whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I won't leave you alone ever again." Maria clung to him even more, feeling supported and protected by her father's unconditional love. She knew that with him by her side, everything would be all right. After hearing Maria's terrified account of the threats and abuses committed by that man, Antonio became furious with rage. His priority now was to protect his daughter at all costs. Without hesitation, Antonio grabbed the car keys and resolutely headed towards the house where, according to the footage, that man was known to appear. His chest burned with indignation, and his face was twisted in an expression of pure hatred. Upon arriving there, Antonio barged into the property furiously, slamming the door with such force that it made the man, who was sitting on the couch, jump in fright. "You bastard! How dare you mistreat my daughter?" shouted Antonio, advancing towards the intruder with clenched fists. The man, visibly intimidated by Antonio's wrath, tried to back away, stammering, "What are you doing here? How did you find out?" "It doesn't matter how I found out," roared Antonio, grabbing the man by the collar. "You're going to stop threatening and mistreating Maria immediately, or I'll turn you over to the police, you scumbag." The man trembled with fear, realizing the seriousness of the threat. "No, please. I promise I'll leave her alone, I swear." Antonio looked at him with contempt. "You'd better keep that promise, you worm. Otherwise, I'll take care of you myself." Roughly releasing the man, Antonio turned and left the house, furious. His heart still raced, so great was the hatred he felt for that despicable being who had dared to harm his beloved daughter. "My girl, I swear I'll protect you from this plague. No one will ever hurt you again," he murmured, as he drove back home, determined not to leave Maria alone for a single second. After Antonio's abrupt confrontation with the man who had been threatening and abusing his daughter Maria, the man was terrified. He knew the enraged father was capable of carrying out his threats and reporting him to the police. As soon as Antonio left the house, the man began hastily gathering his belongings, in growing panic. He couldn't risk staying there and having to face the old man's murderous gaze again. Damn. I knew that idiot old man would end up discovering everything." The man grumbled, as he threw his clothes into a suitcase. He knew his situation was unsustainable. After all, Antonio had clearly threatened him, making it evident that he would not tolerate any further aggression against Maria. That old fart. "He won't leave me alone," the man muttered, as he hurried out the back door, nervously looking around. Desperate, he got into his car and accelerated, disappearing into the darkness of the night. He didn't want to risk staying nearby and ending up in trouble with that man so determined to protect his daughter. When Antonio returned home, he found Maria curled up on the sofa, trembling and afraid. As soon as she saw him, she ran into his arms, crying profusely. "Dad, are you okay? He didn't do anything to you, did he?" she asked, clinging to Antonio in desperation. Antonio wrapped her in a tight embrace, his heart overflowing with relief to see that his daughter was safe. "Shoo, my love, I'm here. That man is gone, and he won't bother you anymore," he said, tenderly stroking Maria's hair. Maria looked at him, her eyes glistening with tears. "Daddy, did you do this for me? Did you threaten him?" Antonio nodded, determined. "Yes, my daughter. I couldn't let that monster continue to mistreat you. Now you're safe, you can rest easy." Maria hugged him even tighter, finally feeling free from that nightmare. With her father by her side, she knew that nothing and no one could harm her anymore. After all the turmoil and terror they had faced, Antonio finally managed to bring Maria back into his protective arms. He held her tightly, feeling the relief wash over his heart as he knew his beloved daughter was safe. "My girl, my most precious treasure," Antonio murmured, placing a loving kiss on Maria's forehead. "It's over, you're safe now," Maria sobbed, still clinging to him. "Oh, Daddy, I'm so sorry. I should have told you everything from the start, but I was so afraid." Antonio gently pulled her away, holding her face in his calloused hands. "No, my daughter, don't apologize. You're not to blame for any of this. I should have noticed what was happening sooner." He looked at her with tear-filled eyes, his voice choked with emotion. I feel like a terrible father for letting you suffer alone. But now I'm here, and I swear I'll never leave you again. Maria nodded, tenderly caressing her father's face. I know, Daddy. You've always been there for me, even when I tried to push you away. I just didn't want to lose you too. Antonio pulled her closer, enveloping her in a tight embrace. Never, my daughter. I'll never leave you. You are everything to me, and I will protect you, no matter the cost. They remained there, embraced, as the fear, pain, and anguish were slowly replaced by a sense of peace and security. Maria lifted her face, looking at Antonio with shining eyes. Thank you, Daddy. Thank you for saving me from that terrible man. Antonio smiled, gently stroking her hair. I will always be here for you, my love. Nothing and no one will hurt you again, I promise. In that moment, Antonio and Maria sealed a new chapter in their relationship, strengthened by an even deeper understanding and the certainty that nothing would ever tear them apart. After the terrible incident with the man who had been threatening and mistreating his daughter Maria, Antonio became even more vigilant and determined to ensure her safety and well-being. He didn't want to risk leaving her alone, not even for a second. So, Antonio began to closely monitor every step of Maria's daily routine. My daughter, would you like me to stay here with you while you do your physical therapy? He would ask, observing her attentively. Oh, Dad, it's not necessary. I can do it on my own, Maria would respond, still a bit reluctant. But Antonio insisted, with determination. No, my love. I want to stay by your side, to make sure you're safe. Maria would look at him with affection, seeing the worry etched on her father's face. She knew that Antonio was just trying to protect her, so she would agree without complaint. During mealtimes, Antonio made sure that Maria ate everything carefully. He observed her with extra attention, always ready to help her if she needed it. Come on, daughter, finish your plate. You need to eat well, he would say, with an encouraging smile. In turn, Maria felt safer and more supported than ever. She knew that as long as her father was by her side, no harm could reach her. In moments of leisure, Antonio also refused to leave Maria alone. They would spend hours talking, laughing, and reminiscing about the good times they had shared. Dad, you don't have to be glued to me all the time, Maria would joke, although she secretly loved this extra attention. Aw, can't I even take care of my little girl? Antonio would reply, winking conspiratorially. Gradually, Maria began to feel increasingly secure and protected. And Antonio, in turn, started to regain the tranquility he had lost when he discovered the abuse she had suffered. Together, they were building a new reality, based on trust, love, and the certainty that they would remain united, overcoming any obstacle that might arise. After all the whirlwind of emotions and challenges they had faced, Antonio and Maria seemed to have found a new way of living, strengthened by an even deeper connection. Antonio continued to be zealous in protecting his daughter, but now she also realized that her role in this relationship had changed. Maria began to have a positive influence on her father, helping him to find more joy and balance in his life. Dad, you need to rest a bit. Let's get out of here and take a walk, Maria would say, with a loving smile. Antonio looked at her with tenderness, readily nodding. Ah, my daughter, you always know what's best for me. Together, they strolled through the parks, stopping at cafes and little diners. Antonio was surprised to notice that, gradually, Maria was regaining her joy and vibrancy. "You look so beautiful today, my love. I'm so happy to see you like this," he would say, tenderly caressing her face. Maria would smile, holding her father's hand. "It's thanks to you, Dad. You made me feel so safe and protected." At home, they would dedicate hours upon hours just talking, laughing, and sharing their experiences. Antonio was amazed to see how his daughter had become such an understanding and attentive companion. "You know, Dad, I think this whole ordeal has made us even stronger. Now I know I can count on you for anything," Maria would say, looking at him with admiration. Antonio would embrace her with tenderness, feeling his heart overflow with joy. "And I know, my love, that you will always be my greatest treasure. Together, nothing can defeat us." Gradually, they rediscovered the essence of their relationship, forged in unconditional love and mutual support. Antonio and Maria had found a new way of living, where safety, trust, and care were fundamental pillars. And this strengthened connection, born of overcoming and understanding, would accompany them through the days to come, illuminating their paths and nourishing their hearts.